ado shidine. She'eya Tatiana Benali inishye, Twoto nasha nanes ejitachini nishle nashashidine bashichin, Kimplichini dashiche ado bitani dashinale, Akot ego dines sanishle. Hello, my name is Tatiana Benali. I am from Tebet'a on the Navajo Nation. I am the Zuni clan of the Tachitni and born for the Tiwa Bear Clan. I currently reside here in Lenape-Hoking, and I'm here with the American Indian Community House. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is our 8th installment of this series. So thank you for everyone that has shown up to our past social justice series and continue to show up for these installments. It means a lot. So this series is hosted by the American Indian Community House to provide an intentional online space to collectively explore and discuss resources and information regarding Indigenous issues and conflicts that directly affect us today. Through shared concern and efforts, we will discuss actions, solutions, and the many different ways we can contribute toward the movement and change making. Online in solidarity, led by and for Indigenous folks, we will focus on providing a space that is respectful, accessible, and in unity. Some quick housekeeping before we get started with today's agenda. I just wanted to remind you that this is one of many events that the American Indian Community House hosts. We are obviously in a time of social distancing and quarantining, so there's a lot of time to log in on Zoom or tune in on Facebook or YouTube. There's a lot of programming that the community house is providing. There's programming on Wellbriety support, elder storytelling, makers labs, at-home fitness classes, census events, as well as this series. Additionally, we just started Native Theater Thursdays, which is going to be pretty fun. So there's a lot to attend, and if you need company or if you're looking to learn a new skill or just communicate with some relatives virtually, definitely follow the American Indian Community House on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Yeah, I think I got all of them. Oh, and on the website, you can sign up for our email listserv, which we send out like weekly updates with all of the events that we'll have. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Novo, New York City Census, New York Women's Foundation for continuing to help us provide these resources for our community and continue to do the work that we do. I'm so happy to have everyone here. For those that are tuning in via YouTube, via Facebook, and on Zoom here with us. Last week, we sat down with relatives from the Cheyenne River and Oglala Sioux tribes. 2 weeks ago, Governor Kristi Noem of so-called South Dakota wrote letters to Cheyenne River Sioux and Oglala Sioux tribes demanding that the tribes' COVID-19 preventative checkpoints be removed. And obviously this is a threat on tribal sovereignty, so we sat down and discussed and shared resources surrounding that, and we're going to continue to closely follow that situation as it plays out and, you know, figure out what we need to be doing to be good relatives in this time. And this Tuesday, we'll be sitting down with historian Chief Mark Peters from Munsee Delaware Nation to check in with the Munsee Delaware Nation, learn more about the work the community is doing and what we can do as relatives on occupied Lenape land to be in support of the work, the people that originally inhabited this land. We will also be working on building intertribal relations with the Munsee Delaware Nation, with a panel and discussion with the H community / allies. This event is very important, as this is something that we need to be doing to be good relatives, is continuing to build that relationship. So for the agenda, I'm just going to quickly go over it. From 6 to 6:15, introductions and brief overview. 6:15 to 6:45, Chief Mark Peters will speak. 6:45 to 7:15, a Q&A and open discussion. And then from 17 to 7:30 is closing remarks and H announcements. So without further ado, I would like Chief Mark Peters, if you could please introduce yourself.
All right. It's surely an honor to have been invited to speak here tonight with everybody. Nin Deshinzi, my name is Mark Peters. I should have said Kola Mosimwa first. Greetings to everybody. Nin Deshinzi, Mark Peters, Nidun Giai, the Munsee Delaware Nation. I'm from the Munsee Delaware Nation here in Ontario, Canada, on the Thames River. So it's a real pleasure to be here tonight, and I look forward to talking to everybody and talking and hearing some questions and comments and such. So I look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're so honored to have you here with us today as well. I guess if you wanted to go ahead and dive into a little bit of, history, or really like anything like work that your community is doing, right. Whatever you feel is important.
I think I'm going to talk a little bit about today, really. I've been talking about our history through these sessions I've been doing on Facebook over the past while. And I got to the year 16.
Talk a little bit about that? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I've been doing history lessons on my Facebook page. I've done 6 of them so far, starting with the Ice Age, and I'm at the year 1645 in the New York area right now. But if anybody wants to access them, they would have to go to my Facebook page and scroll down and look for them. But yeah, they're getting some good views and some good comments, and we're really going thoroughly over our history right from the beginning, that we can, as far as we can go back anyway. So I think it's a good opportunity tonight to talk more about the present, perhaps, and a little bit about how we got to be where we are here today. And so maybe I can just start with, we are known as the Munsee Delaware Nation. We live on what's called a reserve here in Canada. It's the same as a reservation in the US. And we are geographically connected to 2 other, what we call First Nations here in Canada, and that's the same as an Indian tribe in the US. So we are geographically connected to the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, and as well as the Anyataak, the Oneida Nation of the Thames. So all 3 of our communities are geographically connected, actually. But our particular nation is, we have 600 members in our, approximately 600 members of our nation living throughout North America. We only have about 160 people living here on the reserve. We have about 2,600 acres at the present time. And we are funded through the federal government, actually, and have been for some time. We're under the total control, to a certain extent, of the federal government, unlike tribes in the US, which have a certain amount of sovereignty. We are working on implementing our own self-governing processes at the present time. but we have work to do in that area. So at the present time, all of our funding comes through the federal government or the provincial government, which is the same as a state government, to run our community. We have a number of services, just like any community would. We have our own education services for post-secondary education, as well as for high school and elementary. We have our own police force here, as well as a regional police office located on our reserve. We have a child and family services organization that's based here, serving a number of reserves in the community. We have our own administration of all our programs and services, social services, health and wellness. We have a healing lodge. That's a 22 bedroom residential healing lodge. Bingo hall, community center. We have all the things that most communities would have, and the programs and services to meet the needs of our citizens. We have an elected chief and council, one chief and 4 councilors under what's called the Indian Act in Canada, a very old law that was created back in the 1860s that still applies to us, believe it or not. And we are working hard to get out of from under the yoke of that law. But we serve terms of 2 years under this law, and there are other kind of restraining factors as to what we can do. But the type of government we have, chief and councilors, goes back to our own traditional way of doing things. So it's not really a lot different than we always have done in the villages that we occupied when we were back in Lenape-Hoking. There was always a chief and always councilors in each village. So we, like I say, we live on what's called the Thames River. We don't have a lot of resources here. There's a lot of land that's farmed. The river isn't really successful for fishing much anymore, and there's a bit of hunting that goes on, but most people work on the reserve here or in town. And we are dealing with the COVID crisis right now. One way we're dealing with that is I heard mentioned that there are blockades at a couple of nations in the US there that the governor wants removed. But we, all 3 of our reserves are actually on total lockdown right now. Almost all the roads are blocked off, but certain roads have access, and there's checkpoints at these roads with people who are there to make sure only members of our communities can come in, or essential services. So we have no cases of COVID-19 on either of our 3 reserves at this present time. So it looks like the blockade of the roads will continue for some time. And we have what's called an emergency control group within our community that we've appointed, who is addressing the needs of all the households in our community. So we are providing food, for instance, and gift cards to buy things like perishables and such, trying to stop people from having to go into town and expose themselves. We're working on the mental health aspects of things as well now through our staff and the programs that they've put in place for the next 3 months or so to get people doing things around their houses and outside, but yet remain distant from each other as households. So it's been a learning process, that's for sure, with this pandemic. But we seem to be doing okay. And we have all of our offices closed down, like anywhere, I guess, from the sounds of it. All of our staff work from home and come into the office only as needed. We have a small council, like I say, of 4 counselors and a chief, so we can meet as long as we do it at a distance. So business is continuing to operate here on the reserve as we deal with this pandemic. And yeah, so things aren't too bad in the area of the pandemic concerns anyway. I might just get a little bit into our history here. We are known as the Munsee Delaware Nation, and as I've been talking about in my history lessons, we are originally from Lenape-Hoking. Our ancestors can be traced all the way back to that area. As a matter of fact, one of our members from an 1830 survey noted that he was born in Minnesink, which is the area of the Delaware water gap on the Delaware River. So we've come from that area to here over a couple hundred years. We lived on the US side of the border probably until the late 1770s. I'm not going to go over the time period before then, but in the late 1770s, we sided with the British during the American Revolution. Whether that was the right thing or not, I'm not sure, but we are where we are anyway. So, like I say, in the US, tribes have what they call a certain type of sovereignty, and here we're under total control of the federal government. So I guess that's what the difference that we have, that we might have had more control over ourselves if we had stayed with the US. But anyway, during the American Revolution, we sided with the British, as I said, and because of the abuses we had suffered in our homelands, we took out a certain amount of our frustrations on that area by destroying a lot of property and such. And because of that, the Army took its vengeance out on our villages in the Susquehanna Valley and burned all the Munsee villages and destroyed all our cornfields and all our resources as well, and ended up forcing us to move from the Susquehanna Valley into the Cattaraugus area of New York and over into the Sandusky area of Ohio and the Maumee River in Ohio. And somewhere around 1783, we moved across the border into the Thames River where we live now. So we moved here based on the promise of a treaty with the British government due to our alliance with them during the American Revolution. And after we got here, we settled here and we lived here peaceably for about 40 years before it turned out that the government wasn't going to live up to its side of the bargain. We lived up to our side and fought for the British during the entire war and moved here based on the promise of land of 12 by 6 miles, actually, square miles of land, which we were promised. It's a far cry from what we have today of 2,600 acres. However, as much as we weren't as much as they didn't live up to their promise to us, we continued to live here and to farm and make success out of our farming activities, as well as hunting and fishing, and continued to grow and develop over the years to the extent where we are today. However, I should mention that, as allies with the British government, as well as many other First Nations in this area, we were self-governing people at that time and moved over here based on the idea that we would continue to have those rights. However, during the 1820s, when the area started to get settled, as I said, the government decided not to live up to its promise, and we were left having to struggle somewhat to make ends meet. But again, we were allies with the government and dealt with them on a nation-to-nation basis during those times. But when the colonial government started to take control here in Canada, all those past alliances and relationships were kind of forgotten. And we started to get treated like dependents on the government to a certain extent, and laws were started to be made, such as the Residential Schools Act, which was in place here for some 100 years or so, which forced our families forced the children of our families into a system where they were prevented from speaking their own languages and from knowing their own culture and customs and history. And I'm sure we all know these things, but I'm just mentioning that these are the things that happened here as well, because I know they happened in America too, and all over Canada as well. So, we lost a lot of our language and memory of culture and history through that process. But we continued to survive and live here. And when the residential school system ended, it left a lot of families in a pretty bad shape, a lot of broken families. And the next step of the government was to move in and take the children from these families and adopt them out into non-native families. This was called the 60s scoop. So they made these laws, these residential school laws, to somewhat destroy our culture, history, and language, and our family structures. And then after that had happened, they sent people in to take the children from our families and adopt them out. So we've struggled with governmental laws and policies for quite some time here in Canada. And it really wasn't until about the 1980s that we started to protest and make an issue out of our treatment, and the government began to respond, and there was a section that was included in our Constitution regarding Aboriginal rights and such, and the government has slowly began to change its policies towards us and is now starting to recognize our rights to govern ourselves that we used to have a long time ago. So we're here now. The government started to hand over financial and administrative control to us maybe about 50 years ago. And things were pretty bad 50 years ago, in a sense, on our reserves around here. But over the past 50 years or so, our chiefs and councils have really looked at development in our communities. And so we've gone from having nothing to having all these buildings and programs and services that I had mentioned previously, and are in control of and can, provide the types of services and programs that are unique to our community needs rather than imposed on us by some governmental official who thinks they know what's right. So that's a basic outline of who we are today and a bit of how we got here to be on the Thames River. There's a lot more to our history, and I probably have another 10 sessions to go on my Facebook channel about this. I see I got about 10 more minutes to go. So I can do that. We can continue on. I know this, the Indian Community House, American Indian Community House is a organization that sort of represents everybody, all the Native people in New York City. We have similar organizations in most of our cities as well. But we also have, the Munsee Delaware Nation is also part of another larger organization called the Anishinaabe Nation, which is made up of about 44 different First Nations in Ontario. And they were part of this organization, and they provide various services to us so that we don't have to go searching for them on our own. And we have also regional organizations that we're part of, such as the London District Chiefs Council and the Southern First Nations Secretariat and a variety of other organizations. So we have a fair amount of support amongst each other here in the local area when we need it. We are trying to, develop ways to become a little bit more economically independent. We have a lot of office space that we lease out and buildings that we obtain income from. And as well, we have access to casino monies that generated from the casinos in this province. So there's a little bit of more income from there. We're also part of a national organization known as the Assembly of First Nations. They represent all of the First Nations in Canada. And so we are under their umbrella as well. And when it comes to certain federal types of issues, they deal with those on our behalf.
Yeah, and thank you so much. We could kind of open this space up to like a Q&A as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Something that I'm curious about is, as a relative and ally that's currently living, in Lenape-Hoking, like what can we do to like strengthen? I mean, like for me, I'm always like get the land back, so like what can we be doing now? I mean, obviously having conversations is something that is very important. Building these relationships between different tribes and nations. But I'm curious if that's something that Munsee Nation would like in the future.
Well, I've been thinking about that all day, actually. And, I think just the opportunity to talk about who we are, our history, our connection to Lenape-Hoking is important and a good way to get people to understand, that there were other people living there a long time ago. And we're trying to establish a presence back in the New York area of some kind. I know we've got the Lenape Center there, which is staffed by some Delawares that we know. And so we're getting a bit of a presence, you could say, but it's nice to have a more general opportunity here to talk to all kinds of different people in New York, and to know that, we're still here, and we're, we were once some 15 or 20,000 people in that area, and there's only about 600 of us left here in this particular village. There's other Munsees living in other nations in the US as well, but we're down to a pretty small number of people compared to what we once were. And, these things are important to know, I guess, and just something we want, people to know about.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Melissa.
Hi, Mark.
All right,
Thanks for being with us. It's Melissa again.
my pleasure.
So we have a location that we have a seasonal residency on Governor's Island, and there's this rock in front of our house that we occupy during the summer seasons, and it says something to the effect that it's like a historical landmark rock, something to the effect of two young Lenape men. It sort of commemorates them selling the island of Manhattan to, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I can't remember the wording to it, but I find it interesting that that's a landmark. And a couple of times we threw like a red blanket over it just because like it's right in front of like one of the only Native organizations, you know, houses. And it was just like a little bit of a statement, but they immediately were like, you know, like, take that off. You can't do that. Security went in a panic. They didn't know how to receive that sort of action. However, it's just sort of like, for me, it's like, okay, so who's telling these tall tales here? Because I don't know one, and I'm pretty sure, you know, you might have some sort of, like, I think what the question would be is that the sale or the trade of Manhattan. Can you explain that or go into depth about that?
Well, you know, there's no deed for the sale of Manhattan Island from the date it was supposedly sold in, I think, 1626. There's these references and letters that people wrote back to Holland about some kind of sale arrangement, but there's actually no deed or sale document, no record of any transaction that occurred for the sale of Manhattan Island in 1626. The Munsees have a reference to that supposed transaction, though, in a letter to the President of the United States in 1849 to Zachary Taylor, the president. A group of Munsees in White River, Indiana, which included a number of families from right here in Munsee that moved there, wrote a letter to the president talking about first contact with explorers on the East Coast, but also about this land that they'd given the people to stay on overnight, which metaphorically means a period of 1 year, and that they gave them land the size of a bullock robe, which is, say, this big, to plant themselves upon. But they took that bullock robe, which is like a deer skin, basically, and they cut it into a long strip, and the strip ended up taking all the land. This is the Munsee description of the sale of Manhattan Island. Which they are saying that, sure, we gave you a place to stay for a year and enough land to plant yourselves on and make a, you know, to live off of, but that was our understanding of it. And yet even though there's no deed, the other side sort of understands that it was a final and full sale. Actually, the first deed to any sale on Manhattan Island didn't take place until around 1638. The first officially recorded deed, and that wasn't for the whole island, that was just for a certain part of it. So I don't know what this plaque is all about. I saw one up in another area of New York, in a little bay area. I can't remember where it was exactly.
There's a couple of them, and they sort of conclude it with like, oh, the trade was for beads and nails. But Tanis actually has the wording to the plaque. Tanis, read that to us.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a better picture of it because it's so. Oh, hang on, this one's good. Shorakapak Rock, it's called. According to legend.
That's an Indian name. That's a chief, I think.
According to legend, on this site of the principal Manhattan Indian village, Peter Minuit in 1926 purchased Manhattan Island for trinkets and beads, then worth about 60 guilders. This boulder also marks the spot where a tulip tree grew to a height of 165 feet and a girth of 20 feet. It was, until its death in 1938 at the age of 280 years, the last living link with the Ricagawang Indians who lived here, dedicated as a part of New York City's 300th anniversary celebration by the Peter Minuit Post 1247 American Legion, Peter Minuit stuff. But yeah, that's essentially what it says.
That's
I
not
have
the one by,
I have a
Governor
question.
Charlotte, though. Yeah, that's a different one, Tanis.
That's in Inwood. Yeah, that's actually,
Yeah, that's,
Oh,
I
really?
was there at Inwood, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, because I Googled Governor's Island and that's what came up. Okay. Well, I'll try to find the other one, but someone has a question.
Well, that was my question, is like, do they actually, are they using like the same plaque all over the city? Basically, it's the same BS story, right?
Interesting that they still use it, but
Yeah, I actually saw another version of it in this book. I think it's called Mannahatta. Have any of you
oh
seen
yeah,
this? Right? Like there's
Yeah.
a description in there. Some artists I know were quoting from it. You know, it's basically, they've written it in such a way that they really present it as this is factual history,
right.
written
Well-
down something like that. And it's interesting because recently, well, since the pandemic, I've been dealing with my neighborhood's kind of been, the demographic has changed from Black to Hasidic Jewish. And they very much feel that they have the right, because the pandemic is inconveniencing them in their synagogues, to move their prayer practices basically directly outside my windows and everyone who lived here before's windows. And it's very loud and it's very intrusive. And of course, from Indigenous perspective, it's just like, you just don't shove your religion into other
Right.
people's home like that. And I was thinking about the idea of trying to have, you know, communication with them. I've taken to opening my window and singing my traditional songs when they get too noisy, just to remind them that, guess what, there's
Right.
people here for you. But it
Right.
just, to me, is just so much part of this attitude of like, yeah, we can just come in and do whatever we want. And it really got me thinking about, it's so interesting to me that you're talking about this today, because I started thinking yet again is, it's really time for us to debunk that story, because
Right.
it's Manhattan, and because Manhattan is seen as kind of like in many ways, the center of the US in terms of whatever happens here kind of emanates out,
Right.
like Western
Right.
culture. And that story right there is at the core of, you know, why people all across Turtle Island think that it's all okay. And even the
Right.
word of it, the fact that they use the word trinkets, it was in that book,
Right.
Mannahatta, which is supposed to be respecting Indigenous people, and yet
Right.
he's used these words, trinkets and a few beads. It's as
Right.
if, oh, you know, we were too stupid to even understand the value of this land, even if
Yeah.
there had been a trade, which you know darn well. That's what I keep thinking. Yeah, there was probably an agreement even before I heard what you just said, and I'm so grateful
Right.
to hear what you just said, because I've been thinking, I got to make a video or something to speak to this thing that you can just direct people at every time, because people bring it up all the time, right? And it's like, yeah,
Right.
there's probably an agreement that you can come and use the land in that spirit of sharing.
Right.
Nobody
Well,
could even
that's-
have conceived
Yeah.
of selling or trading away the land. And then the
Right.
fact that it's always emphasized, oh, that, you know, it was done for this ridiculously little small amount of money, which just, you know, it's like, oh, because we're just, and Native people are just that dumb,
Right.
you know?
I
Like,
know.
but I feel like that story right there is at the core of
Well-
so much like wrong thinking.
Right.
And I don't know. Like,
No, I agree.
I'm doing a video myself, but maybe we could do some kind of a project that just addresses and debunks that story.
I'm
know?
actually, in the history that I'm reciting on my webpage, I'm talking about that stuff, all of that.
Awesome.
And you know, there just is no evidence of any deed for this
How
Minuit
could there
sale
be?
in
Yeah. How could there be?
26. And the other side of it is that by that date, it's a good possibility we'd already been fairly decimated by disease.
Right.
So that by the time 1638 rolls around, when there is an actual deed for Manhattan, there weren't too many people left there, really. And it probably wasn't that hard to do at that time.
Right.
But I think
Right.
that's a factor that kind of gets missed out a bit on just how decimated we were by disease, even by the 1620s and 30s. It was
Right.
just incredible.
And that's true of treaty making all across Canada, and I'm sure in the US too, right? Is like by the time people were making those treaties, it was like major trauma and
Right.
genocide already gone down. And then people are dealing maybe with, also if you're dealing with paperwork in a language and in a way of thinking that you think you're making a deal,
Right.
and you have an understanding with someone who's being respectful, right? And has your own perception of relationship to the land, but little do you know you're making a deal with the devil, right?
Willow, Mark, it's Tecumseh. We met at your powwow, and then also when you guys came down to Ramapo. I was with Karen, and I was always taught that the Lenape are our grandfather tribe, and that a lot of people actually don't know that, and that they're the grandfather tribe to a lot of, if not all of the Algonquin speaking groups. Even our ceremonies, they acknowledge that in our Medellin ceremonies. I was just wondering if you could kind of talk to that. I know even in the language, when I've studied the different Algonquin language families, that the Lenape language actually is more descriptive. And I was wondering if you could talk about that connection and what that means, being the grandfather tribe.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, we were called the grandfather tribe even into the early 1800s in this area. But from my review of our history, given our long occupation of the area of Lenapehoking, which could have went as far back as the Ice Age, actually, when people were actually living there. Nobody can really say for sure, but it's quite possible that the people who lived in the area at the Ice Age had gone to basically the ends of the earth and could go no further and simply stayed there and developed and became the people we call Munsees today. And there's no doubt we were at least there for thousands of years. There's even a legend called the Legend of the Yaqawi, which Yaqawi means mastodon. So there's a Delaware legend about a mastodon, for heck's sake, and mastodons disappeared about 10,000 years ago. So it looks like we at least had occupied the area of Lenapehoking for quite a long time, thousands of years, and that somehow people kind of sprang from us and went out and created different communities, tribes, nations, that's my understanding, and became the Algonquian-speaking peoples who are descended from us. And I think linguists can somewhat figure this out to a certain degree. There is a very high similarity between the Munsee Lenape and the Anishinaabeg language here where we live now. But I know we were always referred to by other Algonquian nations as the grandfather tribe, or the grandfather nation rather. And I take it to be from our long occupation of Lenapehoking and the spreading out of people from there into other parts of America. That's, and like I say, we, even into the War of 1812 here in Canada, we were respected by that title.
Awesome. We have another question that somebody typed into the chat by Vanessa. Vanessa Dion Fletcher, who writes, I'm wondering why Munsee and Moravian Town are separate reserves when both communities are Lenape people.
Yeah, we have a little bit, we have the same histories, but the Moravians were, had been part of the Moravian missionary attempts to create Christian communities where people could be safe from war and alcohol and disease and such, and learn to live good lives and work and such. But they're also pacifists in the sense that they didn't take part in wars. Not, well, some of them did, but most didn't. So they're also, the Moravians are made up of Munsees and Unami Delawares, as well as parts from other communities like the Mohicans, I understand. So we moved here to the Thames River in about 1783, after the American Revolution ended, based on being kicked out of America, basically, for things we did there. But the Moravians, they came around the other way through Michigan and settled just down the river from us in 1792 and created their own settlement, a Moravian community that was still under the influence of the Moravian missionaries at the time, David Zeisberger, to be exact. And so we continued to reside beside each other. We're called Nahi, which means up the river, and they're called Nalahi, which means down the river. That's how we sort of refer to each other as. But we are definitely closely related, and since their movement to this area, we have interacted significantly with them and have a lot of interrelations with our Moravian brothers and sisters. And they don't go by the name Moravian Town anymore. They go by the name Lenape Lekewit. And I can't spell that, but I can pronounce that. Lenape Lekewit. It means, well, it's a Delaware name anyway. I better not try and interpret it because I might get it wrong. But that's the connection we have with the Moravians. They moved here and created their own separate community about 40 miles down the river and have remained there ever since.
Awesome. Again, if anybody and the people that are joining us right now, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat or raise your hand. I see Winter, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, Mark, I just wanted to ask you about your language. Like, is there very many Lenape language speakers on your res, in your community?
We have, our language is hanging on by a thread, literally. Moravian Town has one fluent speaker, and they have 5 students who are learning from this teacher and who are now fairly well qualified in the Delaware, the Munsee language. We have one person here in our community who is a language expert in Munsee, and she's going through university right now to be able to teach it as well. And she's the only one in our community who really knows the language in a way that the people used to know it. She volunteers and teaches the language to our community and has Zoom lessons, one tonight, right now, actually, that I'm missing. Which is all right. But yeah, it's really hanging on by a thread. There are funding opportunities available here in Canada to help promote language and find ways to get more people interested in it. And we're working on those opportunities right now. We take language as a very serious issue to address and to promote and support here in our community, just like history and culture.
Yeah.
We haven't lost it. It's pretty close, but it's not gone.
Do you know of other speakers like in other communities?
I am not aware of any other Munsee speakers in any other communities. Nope.
I tried a while back to find out if I could learn the language. I did find a lady who's from Canada who's teaching at Ramapo College in New Jersey.
She's from here. That's
Is that
Karen
her?
Moscow.
That's the same lady?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a member of our community here in Munsee. And she does get down to Ramapo and teach the language there. And I think other areas of New York as well.
Okay.
But yeah, she's our one and only language. Well, I shouldn't say the only. There's a couple of other people that are taking a good interest in learning it as well. And even the people that are on the Zoom tonight with the language are taking interest in learning. So we're getting more resources interested and able to speak and learn other parts of the language. So
well, I was actually meaning to reach out to Melissa and the community house because, I mean, I had trouble. I kept trying to go out to the college, but I don't have a car. It's just too hard to get from the city or Brooklyn out there if you don't have a vehicle. But I had actually been going to ask if we could start doing Zoom Lenape classes, you know, because the pandemic has kind of opened that idea right up.
They
right?
actually, she does the classes in the Endangered Language Center in Manhattan, actually.
Oh, she does? Wow.
Yeah, so usually she goes there on Friday and then goes to Ramapo on Saturday and Sunday. So it is,
I
yes.
had known that. But that's great to know.
But
Thank you.
I'm sure it will come back. So yeah, she does do one class in the city, actually.
But she might be open to doing, you know, Zoom
yeah,
classes
usually when
for
she does it,
us.
she drives down to the city and does like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it is in the city.
Chat to come, so you can drop a link in the chat for Winter, and maybe she can look into it.
Okay. Thank
Mark,
you.
Mark, do you speak the language?
No, I'm learning it a bit.
Come on.
I did take Ojibwe lessons about 20, 30 years ago, so I know how to pronounce things.
Do you have a traditional name?
Pardon?
Do you have a traditional name, like in the language?
Well, I have one that was given to me by a Lakota medicine man about 20 years ago as well, but it's in the Ojibwe language.
Oh,
and it's
what is it?
It's Wolf Thunder, but I mean it's Mainganimki. That's what it is. I forgot it for a second there. That's the name that was given to me on this trip I was on with this Lakota man for a while, and well, that's it. So
yeah.
But I don't know. I do know how to say that in Munsee, because thunder is. Well, no, I better not say it. I have learned it, but I forgot. So
you have
kind of cool.
When you were younger, did you have any direct experience with like the 60s scoop or any of the residential schooling? like coming after you as a child? Was that in your neighborhood, or did you have to deal with that personally, or?
Well, I grew up off the reserve, actually. I grew up in California, actually, as a kid in elementary school. But I remember, and I said this on my history presentation, one of the only things I remember about going to school in the US and California was the teacher telling us about these Indians who sold this island called Manhattan for $24. And it wasn't until 30 years later when I started researching our history that I realized that was our ancestors she was talking about. But that's, it's an example of the stereotype that existed during those times. And I've been subject to, I guess, the direct or even subtle racism over the years. In the 60s, it wasn't really cool to be Native, you were treated pretty bad in the 60s, really, and even the 70s. And even into the 80s and 90s, there was still a lot of subtle racism, at least. But, I never had the experience of residential school, though, or being taken away from my family and placed with some strangers like others have been. Those experiences, I never had those. And some people have suffered some pretty bad experiences from that.
Yeah, they have. There's actually a lot of Ongwehue right now that in our area, because I'm in Akwesasne right now, and also in your area around like Six Nations and so forth, on both sides of the border, that are dealing a lot of class action lawsuit of the Indian Day School, and that's where all the kids and their siblings that had to deal with getting snatched up and shipped out into these residential schools, and these priests and nuns and all that. I was just wondering how it affected you all in your area, if at all. But it doesn't seem.
Oh no, we're still suffering the impacts of that. I mean, on the face of it, things look pretty good, but when it comes down to brass tacks, I guess you could say, we still have issues that we're dealing with on a social level that are the impacts of this past treatment by government laws and policies. We have a lot of healing to do, a lot of work to bring our community back up, to have respect and pride in ourselves that was taken away really by the way we were treated over many, many years, our parents, our grandparents. And, we have to deal with these impacts, and we have to try and remain positive and look at the future and not dwell too much on these past events. We got to recognize they occurred, but we have to find a way to heal ourselves and our families and work together to make a better future. So, it's not easy. There's still problems from those experiences for sure.
Yeah, and that's sort of the root, the residential schools and those mission schools, nuns and priests. That's the root of the loss of our language and culture.
It is.
I remember my mother telling me, not wholly, but just partially, saying how her and her siblings used to get beat up for saying anything in our language or any reference of our culture or wearing any beaded jewelry or anything. They used to whip them with rulers, and they cut their hair and all that and the above and worse. Those worse things, but she didn't want to talk about it. But, I would advise everybody and anybody who experienced any level of that. Apparently there's 10 levels to be in the class action lawsuit, but to go after them, to fight, because then you could use those resources to and build up our culture again and get what we need to really go and move forward. You know, but that's the root of the loss of our language and culture, right?
Right.
And also, yeah.
Well, in
it's
Canada, the
rough
federal
here.
government, has provided compensation to victims of residential schools. So they have settled all the issues or claims regarding that. As far as residential schools are concerned, there might be some individual claims that are outstanding, but for the most part, they've, at least according to the government, have compensated and apologized for that. They're in the process of compensating for day school as well right now. So the government here is trying to make amends, reconciliation, I guess you would call it. We've had lots of reasons not to trust the government in the past, though. And there's still that lingering doubt. Although it might be time to work better with government. And surely by the things they say and some of the money they make available, the opportunities are there to do that. But again, the lingering mistrust from the past abuses we've suffered is still there as well. So it's just another issue.
So we're at 7:13. So we're gonna try to like wind down. We have one more question by Monica Buckle, and then we'll kind of really like start slowing down, and you can provide some closing remarks, and we can maybe talk about having you or members from your community back on for another event if you're interested.
Sure.
I think this is a really good platform for us to, you know, share our perspectives and continue to build forward. But go ahead, Monica, with your question.
Thank you, Tatiana. Hi, Chief Peters.
Oh,
I have a question. You mentioned healing and that process of healing to move forward as your community needs to do so, as so many other Native communities. Being in the whole COVID-19 stages, this can be especially triggering times for those who have mental health and cognitive conditions. How have you as chief and people within the community done anything with the Healing Lodge you have, or any programs or circles or so forth?
well, the Healing Lodge is vacant right now, and we're just in the process of getting it going again. And a lot of the funding became available because of this COVID to do that, but it's going to take a little time. We are looking at the mental health aspects of this COVID, this pandemic situation, and our staff are developing and have put in place programs to keep people occupied and busy around the house and outside. The local schools have made Chromebooks and data available to all our students so they can keep learning online and keep connected. We have some gardening programs that are coming up, tree planting, best yard contest that's in place, and I didn't make the deadline. So yeah, everything I do in my yards, I can't win a darn thing anyway, but we're trying to keep people up. I'm doing these history lessons every Sunday night now for our nation, basically, but it's getting out there as well. So trying to keep people busy and interested in things. It's a little tough when you can't go to the community center and play a game of basketball or floor hockey or hang around with your buddies and all your friends. We do have a curfew here
Okay.
in the community, and we do have precautionary rules about staying at home or in your yard and the social distancing and all that. So, and it is tough. And we're a small community. Actually, we only have about 70 houses,
Okay.
and so we can actually address the needs, the particular needs of each home, fairly well. We have the staff who can do that, our community health nurse and our community health representative and social services people. So yeah, we are working on dealing with that mental health side of things. And so far, not too bad.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And I look forward to hopefully on your Facebook, you'll post best yard.
Oh, well, I won't win anything, but it'll be a nice yard anyway.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I lied. We have one more question, and this
Okay.
is by another relative. Zubin, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I didn't hear when you first started the number of people you have in your community, because so I was curious about that.
Okay.
And also, I just asked for a friend request because I am interested in following your lessons.
Okay.
And of course, because for me, what you've given us was a very brief sort of, I could have done this for quite a bit longer. And one of the questions I wanted to ask, but I don't know how to access the actual question. The question was, how did the Indian Act impact people in Canada and your people?
Right.
Because the Indian Act was also one of the things that it did was it was a way to define who was Native and who wasn't in Canada. And there were small numbers. It was an easy way to discount them. That's for another discussion. But I would like you to friend me so I can follow you.
Okay. I don't have your name but you can find my site.
I put it on your Facebook page.
Okay, then I'll friend you for sure.
Yeah, because that's why I didn't hear how many people were in your community, because I was quickly trying to.
We have about 600 members altogether in North America, but we only have about 160 people living here on the reserve.
So that presents a lot of attention when you have almost 160 people, and the amount of health services you have has to be done almost on a one-to-one basis, or it has to be done in a very special way. And also oftentimes it turns into harm reduction and things like that. That also is, again, something for another discussion.
Sure. Oh, we as far as the Indian Act, I'd just like to say that had a very serious negative impact on all nations in Canada. It's basically a set of rules made by strangers who said this is the way you're going to live from now on, and total patriarchal superiority type of attitude that was imposed upon us. And that, like I said, we're trying to get out from under at this present time. So yeah, I'd be happy to friend you for sure and get you in on the history lessons that I'm doing. I'm at the year 1645 right now, and I have a long time to go yet. So.
And the previous history lessons live on the Facebook page, is that right?
Yes, there's 6 lessons so far. And I talk about, like I say, from the Ice Age period when archaeological evidence shows people were actually living in Lenapehoking at the time, and into the description of what life was like before contact, and then what happened on first contact with a guy named Giovanni de Verrazzano in 1524, and then second contact with Hudson in 1609, and then the impact of that contact on us up to 1645, which was a devastating, catastrophic experience for us. And things don't get better as we move along until much, much later. But yeah, that's just a brief overview of what we've been talking about so far. And there's a lot more to come.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, it's such a blessing. If you have any last words to say, or if you wanted to direct anybody on the call or who will be tuning in through either YouTube or any of our shared links, you can go ahead and mention those now.
Oh, I'd just like to say hello to Tecumseh. I haven't seen him in a while. Good to see you again, and everybody else from your community. But I don't know, I'd just like to say it's been a pleasure to be here, to talk to everybody, to get to know who everybody is in this format that we're doing here, and to, you know, talk a little bit about our history and who we are today, and develop some relations perhaps with people in Lenape-Hoking that we don't have right now. So this is a start to that, I guess, in a sense, with a much larger audience than we've sort of been able to reach so far, actually. You know, we've been down that way many times and been here and there, but we don't really feel we've been involved much with things that are going on down there to the extent that we'd like to be. So
You gotta come see us at the American Indian Community House.
I've actually been near there, and I've had intentions of stopping in before, but I definitely will next time I'm there. I promise.
I was keeping an eye out on the Lenape powwow, and I was trying to meet as many Lenape as I could, because I guess you all had a gathering prior to that. A member of our community, George Stonefish, was one of the organizers for that powwow, and he's Lenape. Do you know him?
He's from Moravian Town down the river here.
Yeah. So he was one of the organizers, and yeah, everybody was busy though. It was really busy and exciting. It's too bad you didn't make it.
I was there.
However, were you there?
Yeah.
Oh, I was in the back. I was in the back by like the fashion section and the panel discussion section in like the theater.
I was there. That was a great powwow. I thought it was one of the best powwows I've been to in a long time.
Yeah, it was nice, right? Hopefully we can do that again. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it, and hope to see George again down that way one of these days.
Yeah, and maybe next year when things clear up in New York City, hopefully that happens soon. Maybe we could have a gathering at our residency on Governor's Island, and we can go and kick that rock. We can kick that rock together that says all those lines. But remember,
we're on board for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
It'll be great to hear of any other activities going on. I'll keep following your page now that I know where it is.
Yeah, I'll get in contact with you too directly as well. But yeah, thank you for being here. Sorry, Tatiana, go ahead.
Oh, no. It's all good. It's all good. I think like that this was the intention of this social justice series, just to have, people have conversation and, start those preliminary steps for discussion to continue building and organizing together. So certainly, like, everybody on this call, go and follow the Munsee Delaware Facebook page and tune into all of those history lessons. Like, that's something that we need to be doing if we're living on, Munsee land. Like, that's the least that we can do. So
That's nice.
so I did wanted to direct everybody there, and I'm trying to find it in the chat again, but maybe Tanis, if you can repost those links for the Facebook. Yeah. With that said, thank you everybody for tuning in. We do have like a lot of programming at the community house. One of the other like series that Tanis is who I'm talking about, me and Tanis, also do a lot of work with census and kind of putting it in the perspective of, Indigenous peoples. And I think we have a poll, correct, Tanis?
Yes, I meant to launch it earlier, so bear with me. I'm gonna launch it. We're trying this new polling feature. It's gonna pop up on your screen as a separate window. It's 2 quick questions. Don't worry about that timer. I'm not sure what the timer is for, but if you can just click if you've done the census, or if you haven't, you're going to, that'd be great. And number 2, if you haven't done it, it's anonymous, so don't worry, we won't know who's hitting what. And that's gonna really help us out with our census work. So take some time to do that, and we'll go ahead, Tatiana, keep going.
Oh yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island and their relationship to the census, you can send me an email or Tanis an email, or you can continue to follow the American Indian Community House. Our perspective at the moment is kind of data sovereignty. So keeping that in mind when you're taking the census and filling it out as an Indigenous person is very important for, missing and murdered Indigenous women and missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, incarcerated relatives, and all of that. Like, we're the only people that are going to be able to protect ourselves. And one of those ways we can do that is through, data sovereignty. And yeah, so it's important that we do that. Yeah, Tanis, could you go through the events for this week? Sorry.
Sure. No, you're right on. A part of a way to participate in social justice is to do the census, is to take back the control. And just for some quick statistics, the census only happens every 10 years, and it's actually very quick. It's easy. It's 10 questions that take you under 5 minutes to do. And 10 years ago when it was done, only around 62% of New Yorkers did the census. And so if you think how we've been told that New York has the most dense population of urban Indians at 110-ish thousand. So if you think that add on another 40,000 who maybe didn't do the census, if they did, our numbers would be so much higher with the data collection. So for events that are upcoming, tomorrow, Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, we have our weekly Honoring Elders and Our Stories of Living Culture. It's one of our Sacred Spaces events. And tomorrow our guest is Chief Harry Wallace of the, I want to pronounce it right, so maybe Reggie or Tecumseh will have to.
Unkichug Nation.
Unkichug, thank you. Nation. And then on Thursday, we have a Fit Native class that I'm teaching. I think it's going to be at noon, but I'll email everyone. And Saturday from 12 to 2 and Sunday 12 to 2, we have our recurring Sacred Spaces Elders Talking Circle. It's a little more private. It's not streamed to social media. And then on Sunday at 3 p.m., Sheldon Raymore does his live updates on Facebook. And then we'll be back on Tuesday next week. Is there Wellbriety this week, Melissa? Are you still here? There might be a Wellbriety on Friday. Yeah, Friday?
Oh, there's not. There's not
No,
this
okay.
week, but
Okay.
you can register for next week.
Okay, then that's it. So if anyone has questions or wants to be involved in any of those events, you can email me, Tanis, Tanis, @aich.org, and I can shoot you in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tanis. Yeah, if you guys have any suggestions for, you know, news that you feel like should be shared, you can also email that to me or Tanis, and we can put it up for the live updates on Sunday with Sheldon. And basically, it's kind of like a news hour for Indian country, and it's like broadcasted on Facebook. So a lot of people tune in, and yeah, it's just taking accountability for our own news and keeping our own communities informed, which is so important. But yeah, if anybody has any lingering thoughts or whatever, thank yous, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and speak.
I just like to say Anishik, which means thank you in Munsee, for this opportunity to talk tonight and to meet people, and look forward to following the American Indian Community House site and what's going on, and stay connected really, and see how we can get more involved. So thank you.